Hey my tech friends, thanks for stopping by. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's continue to grow this channel. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Hey guys, since this is a project, I have to add the disclaimer here that if you follow this project and decide to modify your system in any way, shape, or form, this is 100% on you. I'll do my best to provide accurate information, but there's no way I could 100% know every implementation configuration that you would be running on your infrastructure. Thanks for the added and continued support. Okay, so our system just came back up after the reboot. We just installed our VMware tools, and this is the first time the system is now on my internal network. When you get that pop-up screen that slides out, you want to select no because you don't want network discovery turned on your machine if you're going for security. Okay, so now we're going to run down a series of easy to configure changes that have to take place on your system first. And that's simply, we're going to right-click on the Start menu. And we're going to choose File Explorer. And we're going to right-click on this PC and choose Properties. And we're going to click on Rename this PC. Now, the computer name is important because it's identified, it's the identifier as to the computer on your internal network. However, you want to make the machine not your name. You don't want to use your name, you don't want to use your address, you don't want to use your kid's name, you don't want to use your dog's name, you don't want to use anything that's identifiable as to who you are. So you want to use something obscure. So just enter in what you want to name your machine and then click on Next. And once you do that, you're going to be prompted to restart your machine. So let's restart the machine. So just click on Restart Now. Okay, so the system's back up now. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the registration of our DNS configuration of our network adapter. So what we're going to do is we're going to right-click on our network adapter, choose Open Internet Settings, and we're going to choose to change the adapter options. We're going to right-click on our Ethernet adapter. Now, if you have two, you'll have one for your wireless and wired. You'll have to do this twice. But you select one, just right-click on it, go to Properties, and then choose Internet Protocol version 4 and hit Properties again. And in here, you can hit the Advanced tab, and then you're going to hit DNS. And you're going to find something down here at the bottom that says, Register this connection's address in DNS. You're going to uncheck that, hit OK, hit Close, and then you could do it again for your next adapter. You do the same thing, just Properties and go through the settings. And the reason why you do that is because if you're using, say, a laptop, and you take this laptop places, every place you go, your system will register itself in the DNS as the system's name. So it'll show your MAC address and where you are at each one of these locations. Now, if you uncheck that box, then the DHCP server itself will still give the address, but the DNS server will not register that that machine will stay there, and it will not remain there. So basically what you're doing is you're creating yourself a security level by obscuring your location. So you're obscuring the data that's collected or stored on the DNS server of these other places. Places like, Starbucks and things of that. While it doesn't pose any real security fixes, and it's not going to show necessarily in our Nessus scan that we uncheck that. It is something that will help you obscure yourself if you use your machine on public internet. Now, if you use it at home, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you have friends that come over and they connect to your network, they'd be able to find your machine because you could check to see what the computer's name is by IP if you have reverse DNS turned on. Or if, somebody does a scan or sees the system name on the network, they'll see the system name because the scan will show that DNS thumbprint. But if that's turned off, then they won't see that. They'll just see the IP address of the system. And that's only if the firewall's turned off. If the firewall's turned on and you have ICMP blocked, then they don't see anything, which is why that's something that I would suggest you do on your machine if you're the type of person that has a laptop that maybe travels with that particular machine. Okay, so we've got our network configuration done. We renamed our computer. The next thing we got to do is obviously we're going to have to go through and make sure our Windows updates are turned on. You don't want to turn them off. And I know that there's people out there that are going to argue and say, I don't want my Windows updates turned on, blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is Windows is flawed with security bugs. And if you don't turn them on, you run the risk of having open ports, open connections, and other issues on top of that in the operating system. And it's just not worth it. Just schedule yourself once a week to run your updates and just run the updates, and then it won't bother you. It's not going to annoy you if you keep on top of it. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to kill off annoyances that start up with Windows. And to do that, what we're going to do is we right-click on the taskbar and choose Task Manager. Click on More Details and click on Startup. And in here, just right-click on these things and disable them. Like for instance, we don't want Edge to start with Windows. We don't want our OneDrive to start with Windows. We can disable those things from running when the system starts. Now that doesn't mean you can't just go in here and just double-click on OneDrive or double-click on Microsoft Edge to actually start them, but they don't have to start with the operating system. And the reason why they generally start with the operating system is to download or to upload or to update before you actually start to use them. But there's no reason to do that. So that'll reduce the overhead of the operating system on startup. Speaking of which, let's take a look before we do any changes as what our performance currently is. So right now we have 2 cores and we have 8 gigs of memory allocated. Now if we do a comparison between this system and our X-Lite and our Ghost Scepter 10 system, then we'll notice that this system out of the box at idle is using 500 megs more memory and about 1% more CPU than our Ghost or our Scepter systems. Now, as far as the actual storage is concerned, from a comparable comparison between this operating system and the other, we're using about 19 gigs of storage to actually run the operating system. Now, the XLite system uses 5 gigs, and the Ghost Scepter system uses, on 22H2 anyway, uses close to about 9 gigs. So we're about, at least at the minimum, we're about 10 gigs more than those other 2 operating systems. But let's see if we could trim some of the fat out of the operating system. Let's see if we could secure the operating system with some scripts, and then we'll use this as a test bed, and we'll fluctuate between this and our X11 or X10 system and our Ghost Scepter system to see if the patches that we apply to this actually secure those other operating systems too in the process. Okay, so the first thing I did is I downloaded the Start Is Back Plus application. And the reason why is because that's something that was running on both our Ghost Scepter and our X-Lite systems in some way, shape, or form. There was tweaks to the UI. So what I'm doing here is I'm showing you what we have as far as utilization. And I'm going to install this application to see if our utilization goes up after installing the application. Install it for everyone. I'm going to install it. Okay, so now we get the ability to customize the actual menus to show specifically what we get in the menus. This is something that, while it exists in those other operating systems, you have to create a new user before this will actually prompt and actually give you this information, which is really a bonus as to why I prefer to use something that I would build myself versus somebody else's configuration. Again, you can use customized start menus colors too. Like, we could change the do the same thing with the taskbar. I want to make it pink. There you go. Got a taskbar now that's pink. So that gives us our customization of basically our Windows 7 look, which brings that back to this particular operating system. And at that point, once we did that, I didn't really see any utilization changes. I mean, obviously we get the blip when we're doing our installation process, but for the most part, I don't really see any additional utilization. And one of the nice things about this application is the right-click menu still works. So it's a well-designed application versus like the OpenShell, which is, honestly, if you see OpenShell on a server or on a desktop and an IT company puts it there, automatically assume it's amateur hour and anything they're doing on your machine is probably worse than the machine would have been if they didn't do anything in the first place. So as we're sitting here watching this, I'm actually watching memory creep. So we were at 1.7 gigs of utilization, 1.6 gigs of utilization at idle. And right now we're still at idle at 1.9 gigs of utilization. So The only thing we've changed at this point is the installation of the actual start menu. And while I don't know for sure that that is the cause, since that's the only change we've made, we've actually increased resource usage by 200 meg. So presumably if we go to the other operating systems, the XLite or the Ghost, and we remove this package, we'll probably gain 200 megs of memory back. Which, while that's not a lot, when you're talking about gaming, you want every single piece of resource available for your game and not to be used as running your desktop. Pretty colors don't necessarily make a system run better. And here we go, we're still creeping, we're at 2 gigs. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is scripting. So what should we do, right? I know one of the annoyances that people use those other operating systems for is simply just the script to disable or enable Windows updates. And it's really simple. To disable Windows updates, this is all it is we'll use the seconfig WAU or WUAU serve and then set the start to disabled. And then we'll do the same thing for bits and the USO service, and we'll set them all to disabled, and then we'll net stop all of these actual services and then exit the command script. And what that'll do is that'll disable Windows updates from running. And then if you want to turn the updates back on, then you just do the opposite. You seconfig the actual services back to demand only, and Windows has a built-in polling system which will poll automatically, so every 30 or so seconds it'll start and kick itself off. And then at that point, all you got to do is just jump into the settings console and run the update. It'll run the update. But if you want to stop it then, all you got to do is literally just run this as admin and you can stop the services. So let's take a look at that. So if we open up Start menu and we go to Settings and we go to Updates and Security. Right now we have updates that we could check for. All right, so if I hit check for updates, it's going to run and check for the updates on the actual system. But if I say, you know what, I don't want that to happen. I want to run this as admin. And I want to disable all the services. And if we go back over here, it's going to tell us that it can't check for updates and that the services are not running and that there's an error. Something went wrong. Try to reopen the settings. So basically what we did is we just disabled Windows updates. It's just that easy. There's really nothing else that you have to do in order to disable them. Now, with that said, that's not a good idea. Because if you disable the updates, then you're also disabling the Defender application from running its updates. So we're just going to re-enable this by clicking yes and running the updates. So now if I go back in here and I go to Settings, and I go back up to Update and Security, and I go to Retry, and the system will check for updates again because the service is running. It's really that simple. There's really not much to it to actually do this. So what I'll do is I'll, again, just do edit so you can see in there as to what you actually have to do if you want to create your own script to disable your updates. Or if you want to enable your own updates, then it's literally just this same script. So just pause it at these locations. You can write your own, save it as a .bat file and run it as admin. You need to have UAC turned on in order for this to work. If you have UAC stripped from the operating system, it'll still work. But if UAC is disabled, it will not work. So make sure UAC is enabled in order to run these. And by the way, don't disable UAC if you have an option. While it is a pain in the neck, I know that. The truth of the matter is it does pose a form of function in security. It will stop things from auto-executing that don't meet the smart screen configuration and that don't have admin access to the system. So in regard to that, what happens is if it executes and it doesn't have the ability to run as admin, then it secures your system from installing things like ransomware or God knows what else. So don't disable UAC. UAC is there for a reason. And actually, it's basically the same as a sudo command in your Linux-based environment, which works pretty much the same way. And likely that's where Microsoft got the idea. Okay, so that easily just fixes our Windows Update issues that we would have with the operating system, which I know is one of the reasons why we would run the customized operating system. The next thing we got to do is we got to actually take a look at this firewall configuration and figure out what's going on there. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to actually open up PowerShell ISE, and we're going to run this as admin. Okay, so once this is open like this, what we're going to do is we're going to choose New. And we're going to get an open tab up here where we could keep track of our PowerShell scripts for the actual system so we can pull back the information that we need. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run our PowerShell script to get the firewall rules. And specifically what we're going to run is we're going to run the get net firewall rule, policy store, active store. And then we're going to output the file to a log file on our C tools directory. Now this is a base Windows 10 machine out of the box configuration. This hasn't really had any customizations outside of stuff that we've shown already on the screen here where you've followed along. So there's no customizations on the system. This is basically what you get out of the box for the Windows Firewall on the system. And what we did is we outputted these files directly to a text file. And the text file is pretty big. It's about a meg, which is relatively large for a text file. And you'll see on the right-hand side here that there's a lot of configuration that goes into the firewall config on the initial setup for your Windows 10 system. Now the idea here is that we should really go through this and trim out all of the configuration that we don't want listening through the firewall. And we don't want the firewall to allow the connection from the outside in. Now, with that said, while we could do that to create security by obscurity on our Windows 10 vanilla system, on our systems like our Ghost 10 system and our systems like our XLite Windows 10 system, removing this function from the firewall, since it's not listening on the inside, would basically close the holes in our Swiss cheese firewall configuration on those systems. Now, you'll notice something that is interesting when we look at these firewall rules, if you haven't used these commands in PowerShell before, is that you're going to see stuff like this @firewall API DLL. You'll notice that this particular configuration here is going to be similar to the ones that we're going to see for @firewall API DLL for, I think it's 8201 and 8206, I think are the two configuration names for the group numbers. That's for like the Microsoft webcam server or the camera server. So that's the group ID. And you can see that specifically in here. And each one of these actually has a group ID configuration. So that's something to just keep in mind. And then additionally, we'll see port numbers. So UDP port 162, UDP port 162. We could come down here further. We'll see additional port number configuration details. There's TCP out. There's UDP in. And so on and so forth. Okay, so since there's thousands of things in here, we really just need to focus on the things that we want to lock down. And we know that we want to lock down the things that we found in our XLite and our Spectre 10 system. So we know that we have the name, the display name, and the other information here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our PowerShell configuration here, and we're going to open a new tab. And in this tab, we're going to use the set command versus the get command. So the get command gets you the information. The set command will set how you want to set the firewall. So for instance, in our configuration here, where we have enabled equals false, we're going to see things in here as well that are enabled equals true. And that means that the firewall is allowed to allow this information through it. So if we want to lock down the system, we can match one or many of these configurations. So for instance, the name or the display name. So we could set our configuration based off of the display name or the name, and then set our enabled to false. And when we run our command through PowerShell, it will automatically go through these systems and disable these firewall rules. Now, disabling them is not the same as deleting them, and I don't want to delete them. And the reason why is because in the event that somebody wants to use these functions, then we should be able to enter the details into our PowerShell command to allow the PowerShell command to work in a way that allows us to disable these functions. Or you could grab them a la carte and enable them one by one to allow you to actually use whatever the firewall port is that's now being blocked, which would give you the flexibility to use the operating system and secure the operating system without having everything opened all at once. Or basically what the XLite people and the Ghost Scepter people should have done in the first place. So for instance, if we set our net firewall rule name, and then we use the @firewall API.dll, -80201, and we quote that out, and we do enabled false, and we run this command, that should disable that UDP port that we use for our camera security configuration. Okay, so what I ended up doing is booting the other system, the Spectre system, back up and taking a look at the firewall log. And once I did that and ran the command again, it worked fine. So what we did is we set the net firewall name to the name that's actually in the other system. We executed it as enabled false, And again, since it's false on this system to begin with, it doesn't really much matter. So what we should do at this point is after running that command, go back over here and we will execute this again. And that will recreate our firewall details. And we could go in here now and do a find. And there we go. So we have enabled is false, which is what it would be on this system anyway. So now what we have to do is, since this is inbound for our connection, this is our inbound communication for our firewall settings. So if we refresh this, you'll see we lost the firewall configuration for inbound. What we have to do too is we have to do the outbound configuration. So we're going to have to add another line to our script. We'll copy this and we'll paste it. We'll change this to out. We should be able to execute this now for both of these things, and we should get, okay, so that's done. So we'll go back over to our initial for our get. We'll close our window back in here and run this again. We could jump back over and check our file again. So there we go. That's our in is set to false for enabled. And then our out is set for false to enabled. And then we have our UDP scope as well. And likely we have our UDP scope for in. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go through this and we're going to have to add all the functionality we want to strip from our Ghost and our Scepter system and add this as a PowerShell script. And once I get that added, I will kick the video back on to show you the completed script for locking down the firewall on our Ghost Scepter 10 and our X10, XLite 10 system. Now, the details of this will be in the description as far as what the script is to actually lock this stuff down. And I will do the opposite to re-enable it. So that way you could have both the enable and the disable scripts. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this so far. Like I said, just going through the systems, trying to lock down both of those systems so we can run the scan again and see if we get some better results. Okay, so at this point what I've done is I've gone through all of our firewall configuration rules on our XLite Windows 10 operating system. I will go through the additional ones inside of the Scepter operating system, but this is a good start. So this is all of the stuff, all of the junk that's still turned on our Windows XLite system that should be disabled, because all of the applications that actually correspond with these services do not exist on that operating system. So there's absolutely no reason why this crap should be turned on in the firewall. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open an additional new tab in this configuration here. And I'm going to go through the configuration for the removal of some of the add remove Windows components that are not necessary to be running in that X10, the XLite 10 operating system. So we could further slim down the OS and not have stuff that's running that doesn't need to be there. Specifically like Windows 10, Internet Explorer 11, and the print services. Because again, if the print services are not enabled anyway, then what's the point of having the actual processes installed? We might as well remove that stuff, because it would take some of the overhead away from the Windows operating system, not having to run those services. So let's continue on this process and get the service structure cleaned up, the actual add remove Windows component stuff that doesn't need to be on that system. Okay, so the first thing we want to do here is we want to actually open command line and we want to write dism online get features, and then we want to output that to a file. And specifically what this is going to do is allow us to view our feature data. So what's in our add remove Windows components, whether or not it's enabled or disabled. So we'll see the state as disabled or enabled. And again, keep in mind this is a vanilla system, so we have some stuff enabled, but for the most part, most of the stuff in here is disabled. With that said, this is the feature name. And this is important because this is what we're going to use to actually disable the features on the other operating system that are no longer necessary to be running on that system. Okay, so that should fix our configuration features inside of our X10 system as well as our configuration issue inside of our Ghost Spectre 10 system. I'll have to go deeper dive into this operating system, into the Spectre operating system, to add additional configuration to the scripts here. But we have our get ability here, so we could pull back our details as far as the network firewall itself configuration, and specifically only show us things that are enabled. Then we have our firewall fix. And this is all the stuff that needs to be fixed in the stupid firewall on those Ghost Spectre on the X10 system, because those two operating systems, again, Swiss cheese the firewall. And we have the ability to pull back our DISM configuration, so get features will give us a background like this where we could do searches for specific keywords to figure out what the name of searches are. Now again, we could add the additional into the DISM and only pull back enabled state if we wanted to, but there might be things in here you want to add, and if there's things that you want to add to the customization as installation settings, you could easily do that by just going into the command logic here and changing the disable feature to enable feature, and it'll re-enable the actual process. Which again, that's this stuff, right? So there's no reason to have the printer services and all that junk turned on. The SMB version 1 should be disabled on Windows 10 and Windows 11 by default, but for whatever reason, it's re-enabled on the Ghost Spectre 10 system, so add the security by disabling it. Then we have the foundation configuration here for our internet printing, and then that locks that stuff down, and then up here, Internet Explorer, so that kills IE. So then the only additional things we have to do is there's a couple registry settings we have to make the settings changes on, and we'll run these packages on the other operating system and rescan it to see if it makes any difference. Okay guys, so we've copied over our scripts at this point to the other system, and I will pick up this video probably tomorrow when we start to go through the initial configuration on our XLite version 10, and then eventually our XLite, or I'm sorry, our Ghost Windows 10 operating system. And I will go through the registry modifications needed, and then tomorrow we'll also scan the system for any changes in our Nessus configuration. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this series so far. I sure am. It's really helpful for me to secure these operating systems, specifically these customized homebrew systems, because I really do feel like they're a great alternative, but they do need some modifications out of the box. They're not plug and play. At least the majority of them require some kind of configuration changes to actually make them function correctly. So with that said, I will catch you guys tomorrow, and hopefully you guys are enjoying this so far. Take it easy.